impact of the pandemic on the food supply chain. My guest is Mary Long. She is professor of supply chain management at the University of Tennessee. Hello, Mary.
Hey, Robert, thank you.
Thanks for being with me today. So, what impacts did we see of the COVID-19 virus on the food supply chain, let's say during the final weeks of 2020?
So I did some polling of grocery workers because they're the kind of closest to seeing the out of stocks at shelf. And the responses I got back were, it's going to sound like an episode of Chopped, where you have these random ingredients and now you have to make something.
Oh
But
boy.
the shortages continued with things like Easy Cheese, Coke products, aluminum being a driver for the shortages there. And
Mhm.
then canned pumpkin, dried spices. And as we started into the Christmas holidays, it was fruitcake and fruitcake ingredients. Because in the past, I guess, stores would have leftover candies for fruitcake and they couldn't give that stuff away in January. And this year, many consumers decided to try making fruitcakes. So there were shortages with those items. I guess typical around this year, fried onions and Alfredo sauce, meat offals, ricotta, cream of mushroom soup, Worcestershire sauce, mincemeat, almond bark, caro syrup, and as we went into closer to New Year's timeframe, it was things like Aunt Nellie's jarred onions and horseradish.
Wow.
You know, martinis and
Mhm.
cocktail, I guess.
Well, we know the world has really changed if people are starting to eat fruitcake. So that
Yeah.
might be our takeaway from this conversation today. But I mean, this all sounds rather logical. You're all saying these are items that are seasonal, that
Yeah.
we know would be in demand. We have also heard over the past year spot shortages of things like pasta, flour, because everyone's making sourdough bread and things like that.
Right.
So no particular surprises per se, but why shortages? I mean, did the suppliers get caught out? Did their distribution systems break down? Did their suppliers break down? Where along the line did the shortages actually occur?
I think it's the perfect storm of connected supply chains. There would be many reasons that would drive that. It's the unexpected demand relative to like some of these items, like pumpkin is for a forecast item that they would know demand is increasing during this time,
Mhm.
but uses have increased. So now people are adding pumpkin to dog food and supplementing, and people adopted more dogs pandemic. So even
Mhm.
if they knew that use was something that existed, then it's multiple layers of forecasting incremental demand that I don't think, we haven't built forecast models that are all encompassing like that. And
Yeah.
then you've got tier two supply issues with things like aluminum and really as far as the stores restocking, the other issue too that can't be understated is that some of these things were impacted by manufacturing delays due to not having enough team members to run an operation, which created a slowdown.
Yeah. And let's not rule out too the impact of panic buying, the psychological
Right.
aspect where people thought that they would never be able to get to a grocery store again, and so they bought all kinds of items, that they might not have
Yes.
bought otherwise, seasonal,
Really
seasonal or
great.
otherwise. Yeah, yeah. What about warehouse capacity? I mean, refrigerated capacity too. How has the supply chain performed in its in having adequate storage and distribution facilities for the flow of product to stores these days?
Well, I mean, at a high level, I have to give a huge shout out to supply chain as a whole. I think we, as an industry, have performed incredibly well under crazy circumstances. But
Mhm.
I do think that there are capacity issues related to refrigerated space, refrigerated capacity with trailers as well. And so those create constraints in movement and distribution storage. You bring up a really great point too. I mean, it's part of the reason why you wouldn't get into at retail kind of tampering demand with limiting if it was only due to supply and then it would free up. It's the combination of both.
Mm-hmm. Well, now here we are in the new year, and vaccine distribution is underway. It requires, of course, its own highly specialized supply chain in terms of like super chilling, super freezing facilities and things like that. But it also requires maybe some of the same trucks and vehicles and infrastructure that everyday food and grocery items require. Do you think that the vaccine distribution is going to interfere with the flow of regular consumer products to market, or is it already, or might it?
Yeah, so I will not claim to be an expert for sure on how they would intersect. My instincts and what I do know right now, I would say that the vaccine delivery would not interfere with refrigerated food capacity because of the different sizes. So I think that the vaccine deliveries are going to go on smaller refrigerated equipment under guard, due to the scope of the expense of that and the value of that shipment. And so I don't think that would be on a 53-foot trailer.
Yeah.
You know.
What has this done to forecasting models? Is it just throwing them all into the garbage and companies and suppliers have to rethink it completely? Or is it an anomaly that we can just get over and we go back to the way it was? Just tell me a little bit about how the impact has been felt there.
A really great question. I think that this has opened the door to how we look at forecasting and need to make those models more robust with including I've seen and I've heard stories of companies using more external data sources to get an idea on predicting more the direction of trends that we hadn't really. I mean, people knew that type of thing existed, that you could go out and pull information from social media. You could pull weather data. It was just kind of resistance to, yeah, that's really complicated to do. And so there wasn't this momentum behind trying to do it. I think this brought to a head a lot of reasons why it was worthwhile to try to go after a way to gain more advantage to being able to predict what is happening. We all have a date yet? No,
Mm-hmm. What have retailers and distributors learned from this particular crisis about their ability to track the progress of products throughout the supply chain, not only in terms of getting it to market, but in the event of a recall and the need to determine like where contamination happened and things like that? Do they need to step up their game?
I think the tracking and tracing of product in my time in the industry, it improved by light years with things like FSMA and having the regulatory
Food Safety Modernization Act. Yes.
Yes. Sorry.
That's all right.
Having things like that accelerate the need for compliance did really move the whole process along. I think that during the pandemic, the tracking and tracing, it got incredibly more complicated due to the volumes, and then due to the adding like kind of live stream capability of bagging groceries across the street at the Walgreens and having a drive-through pickup, like having all those systems linked, I am certain that it created a lot of challenges for retailers, which then what that means really is that everyone errs on the side of caution. And even if you could minutely identify where something needed to be recalled or notification sent, you would err across a broader stream of anyone who came in during the day and picked up a product, or over that week, you would recall it all. So.
Yeah. Well, the vaccine is here, to be sure, but the end of the pandemic is not. We all know we're still a ways away from that. What do your sources tell you about 2021? Do you believe that we're going to continue to see spot shortages of the kind we saw in 2020 going forward?
I think it's inevitable. I think that consumer demand will continue to change things as companies pivot, and that happens sporadically, or if another lockdown happens, then that will change the demand patterns again. And we may have some insight into that now, but for sure there are going to be some new things that surprise us. One of the interesting things I did also is I was looking at, would grocery workers, how do they feel about getting the vaccine? And 100% of the people who replied said they would drive, like there were all kinds of funny responses, but uniformly, and this is a super small sample, but uniformly they would all take the vaccine.
The grocery workers, you're saying,
grocery workers,
those who are interacting with the public. And
yes, and their feedback wouldn't surprise you. It's because, in my store, people don't wear masks. I want to be protected. And then others would respond that, no, in my store, people do wear masks, but I still want to be protected. So, yeah.
And we're hearing that to a certain point, employers do have the legal right to require their employees to wear masks with certain exceptions. And so whether or not they agree to, they may be doing it anyway. So that might help to prevent the transmission of the disease. But in any case, Mary Long, it looks like we're in for another rocky year in the world of the food supply chain. But thank you so much for helping us to understand past and present and possible future of this very, very crucial aspect of a distribution system. Thank you very much for being with me today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Nice to be here.